listening to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. Tonight is no exception. And personally, this is, by the way, people always say me personally, which is redundant and it drives me crazy. So just personally, this story has really hit home for me. And I am beseeching everyone who's about to listen or watch to please share the show, not for me, but for Ellen's parents who are here, and let public officials know that we are not happy. The thumbnail title for this is It's Always Shady in Philadelphia, which I came up with myself, and I was proud of myself for that. And it's fitting for what we're about to discuss. But for those of you who do not know, Ellen Greenberg was found dead back in 2011. It was the evening of January 26th. It was a nor'easter was rolling in. It wasn't like snow, little flurries. It was a big snowstorm. Ellen had stopped to fill up her car with gasoline. She was in the process of making a fruit salad. She was living with her fiance, a guy named Sam Goldberg. And then at some point in the evening, 911 gets a call from Sam Goldberg. Police go over there. They find 20 stab wounds, 10 to the front, 10 to the back, a bunch to the back of the neck, and a huge gash, like a 4 or 5 inch gash on the top of Ellen's head. Initially, it was ruled a homicide. Then some time passed, it was ruled as undetermined. And then after a closed door meeting with law enforcement, the medical examiner, and prosecutors and other people, the determination was then switched over to an unaliving. And when you talk to Josh and Sandee and Guy, who we're about to talk to, and others, you realize it just doesn't add up. Without further ado, Sandee, Sandee, on the left in the glasses, and her husband Josh to the right. And then below us, coming to us from Atlanta tonight, is Guy DeAndrea, who was a homicide prosecutor in the city of brotherly love at one point. He's one of the few people that's looked at Ellen's file extensively, and now he's practicing law. Obvious first question. And by the way, on this show, please, triple Qs. I really want to open it up to STS Nation for questions to Josh, Sandee, and Guy. We're supposed to be joined by the private investigator, Tom Brennan, who's fantastic, but he's MIA at the moment, and Gavin Fish might be hopping on. So Sandee first. I mean, obviously this week we did a kind of a breaking news story on it. The Chester County DA, where this has now been kicked to, put out a press release. I called them and they said, oh, no, we're not doing a press conference. We're going to do a press release. And I had Gavin on the show. And when I read it, my heart sank, because they said that they are keeping the case in an inactive status. And so my heart sank. And then Gavin picked me up a little bit. But Sandee, when you got this news, which I think you may have gotten like drips and drabs before the press release, what was your reaction to hearing it?
Well, I'm not an attorney, and I had to read their statement at least 6 times before I finally could make out what they were trying to say. So they're really not closing the case. If they come across more information, they're willing to look at it. But they looked in a very narrow lane when they looked at the evidence, because we asked them about the photogrammetry, which we provided for them as just one example of evidence, and they didn't know what we were talking about.
And for those who do not know, what is the photogrammetry?
It's a digital example of the various stab wounds and directions, 1 through 20, I guess,
Yeah. By the
And
way,
it illustrates how it could be. I mean, it's so obvious when anyone looks at it that some of them were in the back of her neck in an upward direction from different sides. And I just don't understand how their expert, who is an entomologist and has experience but no medical or forensic background, that's who the city used to conclude that Ellen committed suicide, according to him.
it is, look, I'm just going to say
I don't know if that's really what they did.
All right, Josh, hop in there. And Josh, by the way, real quick, I've never gotten the answer to this question. Do we know how Sam got home that day? I heard somewhere that a female drove him home and that he did not know Ellen was home. Is that true or accurate?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, there you go. I didn't know that.
What I'm saying is they looked at this case as it was a prosecutorial. Could they take someone to court? Were they supposed to look at that? Or were they supposed to look at, did Ellen commit suicide? I'm not quite sure. Because that's their whole thing. Their whole thing was, could they prosecute this case as a murder? But you can't prosecute it unless you have I guess what we need. We need somebody who could be who committed the murder. They could have somebody who would look. They didn't look for murder things. They didn't look for murder evidence. This was just a suicide, plain and simple, from the word go. I mean, they didn't put up that yellow tape anywhere to
no luminol. They didn't have to check the trash cans.
What am I doing tonight? To confine the kitchen. People walked in who were related to the fiance and took out computers. You just can't walk away with computers during a murder trial and take them home. They're not souvenirs.
Yeah, we're gonna dive into all that because some of this is incredible.
So on the one hand, I want to say thank you. They're another a person who's involved in this, and they didn't really close the case because they said it says inactive. But if they had evidence to say it was something else, they'd open the case up. So I don't think they shut the door totally. They definitely did not do a thorough investigation, and I don't know what they were trying to investigate. Were they trying to investigate? Is this a prosecutorial case? Or do we want to say that Ellen did or did not commit suicide? I don't know what their charge was.
Well, we can get the guy in that. Before we get the guy, though, and I promise we're getting to him because he knows a lot. Brooklyn Janet here, to Ellen's parents, to Sandee. Did you ever have concerns prior to this tragedy about your daughter's fiance in terms of his personality or his behavior being questionable, Sandee?
No. I had no inkling that
we had no inkling that anything like this could be
what she was living with.
We didn't know we could be here tonight. That was not in our future plans.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like you, gentlemen, but it's just, this is not, if you would ask me 13, 14 years ago when this all happened, we didn't know squat. The only thing we were concerned about, or I was concerned about, and Sandee, was Ellen and her job. I wasn't concerned about any of the other things that have come out over the years as part of this case, from abuse to medication. It just wasn't part of my thoughts. Yeah. I only had two things: to see my daughter get better because I thought something was wrong, and to hold on to not let her lose her job. Because if she walked out on that job in the middle of the year, could she get another job someday? So that's where my mind was.
Yeah. We can get back to her state of mind because Ellen was seeing a psychiatrist. It was prescribed medication, but no one thought.
Why don't we talk about that right now?
Yeah, jump in, Josh. Go ahead. This is a nice, easy platform.
Ellen was suffering from anxiety. She was not suicidal. That's what the psychiatrist said. You don't necessarily kill yourself over anxiety. She was not depressed. The only thing we didn't understand, and we didn't understand at that time, but we have a little bit more insight now based on hindsight. She wanted to come home, which to us, who was a person who was engaged, we were making a fancy, big-time wedding at the Hershey Hotel, which is a big tourist place in central Pennsylvania. A lot of people know about it. And that's all we knew. And our daughter wanted to come home.
COE, obviously this is one of the most tragic stories, but if you want to queue up, we've got a Hershey, Pennsylvania video for you that you'll like, Josh and Sandee, for the end of the show. I'll keep you guys in suspense.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So Guy DeAndrea, again, he was a homicide prosecutor in Philadelphia. He's looked at the file. Before we get to him, just real quickly. So the Chester County DA put this press release out on November 8th. Today is November 14th, 6 days ago. I guess it was last Friday
morning.
Yeah. So anyway, it goes on to say, as discussed below, the office is currently unable to move forward with criminal charges and is placing the investigation into an inactive status. And it goes on to tell you some of the details that have been reported. Philadelphia police investigated the case in coordination with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office after an autopsy on January 27, 2011. Ms. Greenberg's death was ruled a homicide. That determination was later changed to a unaliving by the Philadelphia Medical Examiner's Office. Between there, it was undetermined. In 2018, this is where it gets interesting, by the way, the investigation was turned over to the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. And who was the Attorney General there? It was a guy named Josh Shapiro, who's now the governor, who is maybe going to run for vice president. So this has deep political roots and a lot of power and the players involved in it, including Sam Goldberg's uncle, a guy named James Schwartzman. So Guy DeAndrea, this question's been up here for a while. It's probably the most simple question, but the most profound. Why on earth is this not being investigated? They say here, by the way, that it was investigated. This case was never investigated.
Not properly.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you saw the Chester County DA's statement, which is, look, I mean, they have to put something out. This is what they put out. But what was your reaction to reading it?
So my reaction to reading the press release, it frustrates me. And let me explain why. So prosecutors I have seen from being a prosecutor for 9 years tend to fall in one of two camps. Do you charge when you can prove in your mind beyond a reasonable doubt that someone has committed a crime? That's usually what you hear when someone declines charge. In other words, I did not charge, or I cannot further pursue this because we have determined that beyond a reasonable doubt, we cannot prove this. The problem with that is not what prosecutors under their oath, duties, and responsibilities are charged with. Proving someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt is the province of the jury. So what is the prosecutor charged with? What is when I was a prosecutor and proud of it, charged with? It was charged with, is there a prima facie case? That's the Pennsylvania standard. Is there a prima facie case? And if there is, your duty as a prosecutor is to charge. What does that mean? It means, is it more likely than not that a crime was committed? And is it more likely than not that person X, whoever that is, committed the crime? That is the charge that prosecutors are tasked with when determining whether or not to charge someone. What you hear all across this country is, I can't prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not your job. That is the job of the jury. Your job is to say, does the evidence meet the burden of prima facie? Period. End of story. But so many prosecutors, and I don't know whether this is the case here or not, so many prosecutors across this country care way more about convictions than they do what they swore an oath to do, which is when you have the prima facie evidence, you put the case on and you allow a jury to determine whether or not someone is in fact beyond a reasonable doubt guilty.
I'm going to jump in here on this one because I don't want to put Josh and Sam. Look, our original case is Dan Markel and Ruth Markel, Phil Markel, Shelley Markel, about as gracious and humble and self-restrained as any victim's family I've seen. But Josh and Sandee are right there with them. If this was my mom, Carm, 14 years in, my mom would probably be in prison, I would bet, or close to it, taking matters into her own hands. But these two it's just how they're doing it. I do not know. And I've said this before I get to this comment. For whatever reason, when we do Ellen Greenberg shows, they don't get the numbers. People, when they're trying to get under your skin, the trolls, they say, all you're trying to do is get clicks. That's true. It's what everyone in media is trying to do. You're trying to get clicks, but I could care less that this is not getting the clicks. It just breaks my heart that it's not. And I hope that people in STS Nation, this community, will just spread this like wildfire on social media, because it is all about the awareness that will bring the change. So please just continue. We're going to keep doing stories on it and keep sharing it. The Philadelphia Inquirer's been excellent at this. Gavin Fish, excellent. So there's other reporters. Penn Live has done a great job as well. We had the reporter from there on, John Lucy. He's fantastic. Right. So here we go. What made Sam from Kenzie here? What made Sam so special that all these powerful people and law enforcement wanted to protect him, potentially jeopardizing their careers? Now, I happen to know a lot of lawyers, so I'm just going to say it. His uncle was a guy named James Schwartzman. He's a powerful judge. And his cousin, James Schwartzman's son, Camion, they went into, first of all, Sam calls Camion before he calls 911. Somehow, James Schwartzman is allowed to get in there. There's a cleanup service, a professional cleaning service. James Schwartzman, the judge, who, by the way, his daughter went to school, Gavin Fish found out, with Josh Shapiro. You start to connect dots here. Josh Shapiro, the current governor of PA, his daughter, again, went to school with the uncle. And they all know the DA, Larry Krasner. It's an incestuous family there. I'm not saying it's a cover-up or corruption, but I'm not saying it ain't a cover-up or corruption. So this story just gets under my skin. And in 2018, then Attorney General Josh Shapiro, now governor of Pennsylvania and future possible presidential candidate, that's why this story needs to get out, is he kicked the can then, and it wound up at Chester County, which is this press release that I'm going over. So, Guy, back to you on this. After receiving the case, Chester County, and I'm reading directly from the press release, Chester County investigators worked to determine whether sufficient evidence existed to reopen the investigation. Detectives first conducted a thorough review of the Philly and the Attorney General's investigations, which, as I understand, there really were none, right? Again, let me just stop there. I mean, Guy, the Attorney General never investigated, right?
No.
Yeah.
In fact, when he got the case, Mr. Brennan was talking to the U.S. attorney, and they said, who did they hire to investigate? Because he said that the Attorney General for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania didn't have the wherewithal to investigate a murder case, a homicide, which I found very interesting. Yeah. But no one really talks about it that much.
Yeah. So to your point, Josh, the Attorney General's office, at least in Pennsylvania, in some states, you will see the Attorney General's office very largely handling homicides. You just don't see that often in Pennsylvania, because the vast majority of homicides are committed in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and the major city areas. And so we don't have the need for the AG's office to come in. They do a lot of corruption, a lot of, non-significant violent type cases, because where the violence is happening, typically speaking, it's in a major city, and we have the prosecutorial resources that smaller counties don't. Now, that said, the AG's office here, in terms of an investigation, I guess it's depending on how you define it. I define it not what they did, and what they did was they reviewed what I did, right? I mean, in other words, the way I compiled the file, as well as whatever the other offices within the city of Philadelphia had put together, including the medical examiners, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office before me, as well as the Philadelphia Police Department. I am unaware of any actual investigative tactics or investigative procedures that were taken by the Attorney General's office in this case.
By the way, go ahead, Josh.
I hate to I'm sorry I'm doing this to you guys.
No, not at all.
The court that just reviewed the case, which was not the first level court, but an upper level court, wrote a 32-page opinion. At the end of the second page, the last paragraph, it came out, and they said plainly that the investigation by the district attorney, the medical examiner, and the police were all faulty.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It must be a very strange document, I would imagine, because the next 30 pages gave evidence and issues discussing why this case should be reopened. And what it actually did is it laid the groundwork or set up for where we are now, where we're going to the Supreme Court in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
There are two things, though, that I think everybody should be aware of. Number one, the medical examiner cannot be challenged when his conclusion. This means he's always right. If you all believe that, fine. Also, there's a statute or something in Pennsylvania, I guess in all the courts, Guy, you'll tell me, about standing.
Mm-hmm.
Sandee and I, believe it or not, STS audience, don't have standing in the murder of our daughter, so we cannot do anything. And that was what the last court said about us, so that they ruled against us going to court. But these two things could happen to anybody, and they probably have happened to other people besides us. And we have just fought a little harder than others.
Again, the story just drives me crazy. This is what Sandee was talking about. And I know some people are like, wow, you're so insensitive. But Sandee and Josh want this to be shown because this is something that they put together to show the various stab wounds. The knife in the center of the chest is like 4 or 5 inches deep. For some reason on this one, the top of her head is pixelated, but there's a huge gash on the top of her head. You see how some of these knives are on an upward angle, the very, very back. I mean, that's literally requiring you to take a knife. I mean, it just does not add up. Now, listen, I've talked to people, the law enforcement, who say that strange things have happened when people unalive themselves, but they said that this, I mean, across the board, everyone I've asked said there's just no way that these type of injuries are coming from an unaliving. I'm going to get back to that door lock because that's important too. But here's the press release. And it goes on, by the way, before we get to here. Here we go. After this review, this is what Guy was talking about. The investigative team determined that based on the current state of the evidence, we cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed, which is BS. And you just heard
that's not their standard. That is not their standard. That is a jury standard, not a prosecutor standard. That's exactly what I was. So Guy just said it. The province
this is the province of the jury on a case, not for the prosecutors. So, I mean, Guy, let's just stop right there. So why are they just flat out telling you something that's not true?
Well, you hear it all across the country. And it's typically from prosecutors who care about conviction rates more than they care about what they are tasked to do. When I was in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and there was a point in time where I was in the charging unit right before going to homicide, every day, my job, and when I was in the charging unit, was to determine whether or not there was prima facie evidence to make an arrest and or to proceed with my duties as a prosecutor. I never once, not one time, literally in thousands of cases, not one time did I say, man, if I can't win at a jury trial, I'm not going to hurt my conviction rate. So I'm not going to pursue this matter. That is outrageous. If that's ultimately what any prosecutor across this country decides, because that tells me you care about political ambitions and conviction rates way more than you care about what you had agreed to do when you took that oath as a prosecutor, which was to do justice. And we fight cases that are very hard and they're very much on the margin, and you may win, but your job is not to decide. You're not the judge, the jury, and the proverbial executioner. Your job is to present evidence to a jury. If you have prima facie evidence, which no doubt here you have, your job is to present that to a jury and let the jury decide, which is what our justice system is founded on, whether or not someone is in fact guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
100%. And look, this press release is misleading in many ways. And one of them is because it's saying, oh, the Philadelphia police investigated. Oh, the attorney general. None of them investigated. This case has really never, ever been investigated. Sandee, I mean, a question for you. Deep Deep Thinker Deb here says, I'm ashamed of our justice system. Have you lost faith in the American justice system because of this?
I'm disappointed in their professionalism, but now that mainstream media is following the case and people all over the United States, all over the world are following the case, the longer Philadelphia continues to dig their feet in, the worse it gets for them.
This is just, I just can't overstate it. I cannot say it enough times. And look, typically we have like 2,000 people in the chat. We have 583 right now. I don't know why, but we need to get this story. The people who are here, please help me get this spread far and wide. Josh, I don't know if you're comfortable answering this or even if you can, but people are asking, why did he do this to her? Are you allowed to answer that or have a take on this?
I can't answer because
Okay.
I can't answer that.
Okay. That's what I
have I
I
can't answer.
Yeah, no, yeah. Okay, don't answer. But
Josh, I'm not your lawyer in this case, but I'll put a air quotes around advise. I advise you not to answer that question.
That's thank you, Guy.
Yeah.
And I'm probably in this group, Sandee and I are the only ones that can't answer that question.
Yeah. Yeah, Guy, let me toss it to you then. If this was in fact,
You're welcome.
Josh. Thank you, Josh. If this was in fact a murder, which most people think it was, let's just call it what it is. What do you think transpired that night? I mean, we'll get into some of the other evidence, but so many things don't make sense. If you were a guessing man, what would you say happened that evening?
Yeah. So motives. All right. I have tried many homicides. I have tried over 100, nearly, if not over, you lose count over time, jury trials. And motive is a tricky question. I'm going to answer your question, but I like to make it clear to everyone. Motive, I used to say all the time as a prosecutor. I mean, sometimes you have the actual motive, right? But that's 5-ish%. And in terms of cases.
Right. And by the way, motive does not need to be proven
at all,
okay.
At all. And sometimes it's really disappointing. And that's a wild understatement for families of murder victims when it's like, I just want the person to apologize. I just want to know why they did what they did. Right. And the way I would explain it to families is I can absolutely empathize, sympathize, and understand that. But what's the answer that's going to be given? Let's assume we're going to get one that will make this okay. Because if the answer is none, which I presume it would be for almost any family, if not all families, then that tells you all you need to know about motive, right? There is no motive, right? Because self-defense is one thing. There is no motive that will ever justify. And sadly, most times you don't know motive. So what transpired in that condo, that apartment that day that led one person arguably, right? And, everyone knows my position on this, or at least my suspected position on this, which led someone arguably to take Ellen's life. Like we won't ever have, unless someone confesses to it, the actual reasons, if they even know why they did this, right? But what we know is that someone violently and brutally, arguably based upon the evidence that was put forward that I have seen, right? That I have seen since leaving the DA's office. I have not seen anything contrary to it. So based on the evidence, right? This is not an opinion. I'm basing this on evidence. Based on this evidence, this is clear to me, unless someone shows me otherwise, that this was not a suicide, right? This was absolutely a homicide. Unless someone can show me evidence that contradicts what I have seen from unbiased individuals who have done examinations professionally and through their expert opinions, as well other things we now know. What transpired in that condo/apartment was violent. It appears to be quick and brutal. And so, why someone would do that? Could an argument prompt it? Could there be, if it was someone known to the family, if it was someone known to Ellen? And I know people might say, why is he being cute and saying it the way he's saying it? There's a real reason that, unfortunately, in our legal system, we have to say it that way. No one's ever been accused of this because of our laws civilly. That could change if the prosecutors did and the government did what they could do based upon what we now know. But this was very likely a situation in which there was a blitz attack where Ellen was rendered in some capacity, either immediately incapacitated or at least in a position where you don't see a absolute brawl in the kitchen, right? There's ways that would have transpired to make that happen. Why?
Okay. I've been playing this game for 14 years.
Yeah.
There was another crime committed against Ellen, wasn't there?
The abuse to her body. I mean, she was, no doubt about it.
Do you think if that happened, they'd want Sandee and I to see those wounds?
Yeah, Josh, tell people what you're talking about, because not everyone does.
It was vitally important to me back then and still today. So it's a great point, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, what else?
It's vitally important to me that they didn't investigate it, because I look at it this way: there was an abuser and a murderer, possibly the same person, in Philadelphia today.
Mm-hmm.
So I use what's it called, Occam's razor. I used everything. I'm a simple guy.
Yeah,
I don't look for things I don't know. I know there was another crime committed against my daughter, and I just look at that. I can't say much more. You're gonna have to. The guy will have to fill in the blanks.
I'll fill in the blanks.
So Guy, just
or somebody.
But by the way, Brooklyn Janet, real quick, and we're going to get right there. Has any expert, Josh, after seeing the stab wounds in her back claimed that it is humanly impossible for a person to stab themselves that way? Has an expert ever come out and explicitly said that, Josh?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, so Josh, I almost never disagree with you. So to be fair, no expert ever excludes 100%, right? No expert, not in this case, any case, right? They can't, because they would be laughed out of court, right? The whole idea is that it's based on probabilistic models, even DNA, right? When someone says this DNA, it's a match, this person is the killer. That's not true. What they're saying is there is a 1 in 23 trillion, as an example, meaning there has to be 23 trillion more people made before someone else could even argue.
There are 175,000 people who have asked for this to go to be investigated on the internet. You can go look on the internet.
Yeah, and we'll put that. There's a petition in there.
Guy.
I'm sorry, Guy. Before we get to this question, back to so Ellen also had different bruises in different stages. Tell us about that.
Sure. So when you review the autopsy photographs and indications on the report, or the autopsy report that was ultimately put together, Ellen had all over her body, in which is interesting, in no areas in which would be otherwise visible, meaning like it wasn't on the hands or the neck or the face, right? It was on the body, which showed various staging of healing. There were significant bruisings that looked like they had just been inflicted, to bruising on the body that had been clearly inflicted based upon the level of healing days, if not weeks earlier. What does that mean? That means at some point over the period of at least 2 to 3 weeks prior to Ellen's death, someone had physically harmed her, not on 1 day or 2 days, but on repeated days leading up to her death. She had significant injuries that were consistent with physical violence being inflicted upon her, right?
Right.
And I've said this before, and it's so flippant and it's so silly, and I hate even saying it, but the best answer I got from anyone when I was a prosecutor asking about these very clear abusive injuries was that what I didn't understand or appreciate, because I wasn't involved in the case when it first happened, is that Ellen participated in Pilates. Like that was literally
yoga or Pilates.
Yes, right. And it's
that's
like
what the detective said.
It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah. By the way, there's a person in the chat. I like to call these people out, and I'll go back to remember this question, Guy. Can there be a prima facie case? Because I'll forget it when the case was never properly investigated. I want to come to you on that. But this is Alan. For goodness sake, stop beating on the prosecutors like they don't have the same views you do. How do you know they have the same views as us? How do you know that? And what are Ellen's parents supposed to do? Sit on their hands and just be nice? No. Sometimes it's time to not be nice. They've been more than nice.
Isn't it true, that the prosecutors have had every opportunity to speak on programs like this and said no comment?
100%. And not only, yes. And
how
do I know they don't have the same views? Well, I'll tell you, I know they don't have the same views, at least as me as a 9-year prosecutor. I don't know if the individual who posted was ever a prosecutor, but what I know is that my views as a prosecutor isn't a view. the oath you take is that you will charge crimes and you will do what you need to do as a prosecutor if you can show a prima facie case. And then it's up to a jury to determine, I'll say it again, beyond a reasonable doubt. I know that the prosecutors who put this statement out doesn't share that. It's not really a view. That's the oath you take, but let's call it a view for argument's sake. They don't share that view because the statement they reached is that we have determined this, that we cannot win beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not your job. It's just not your job.
Yeah. This is maybe the most important question of the night from Marvin's mom with a pug. I've got a pug. Sandee and Josh, they want to know, how can we help bring awareness? What can people do? I know people are as frustrated as me. What can people do to get the word, continue to get the word and keep the pressure on?
We have a Facebook page called Justice for Ellen. We have a Twitter account or X account. I don't know the exact.
Call the prosecutors, the non-prosecutors in this case.
That's
the city officials.
Yeah, but you can
Call
call
them. Put pressure on them.
Larry Krasner. He's the DA of Philly, but he's not handling this because
he was our attorney. That's why the case was thrown out of Philadelphia.
Yeah. And then you can also call Chester County, the district attorney in Chester County, Pennsylvania. You can call them all day long. It's not a bad idea for their phone.
Anybody who's in criminal justice in this, the state and the city of Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this is I'm with Ike here. This is the case that infuriates me the most. I'll stand with this family until my last breath. Such a special girl. If anyone deserves justice, it is Ellen, Josh, and Sandee. Guy, to you. So there was an interesting question. How can it be considered a prima facie case if it was never fully investigated?
No, and that's a fair and good question. And the reason I'm not absolutely coming out, I'm talking generally about prosecutors' offices. And let me be clear. And just, for candidacy or openness, my first legal intern job was at the Chester County District Attorney's Office.
Oh, small world.
Small world. Fabulous office. It was under Mr. Carroll as the elected DA. Made a lot of great friends, knew a lot of amazing prosecutors at that office. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm ragging on this office. And quite frankly, for them, they're getting this 14 years later with a very difficult task, right? In other words, there were so many people before them who were tasked with doing the right thing, meaning investigate, and it just wasn't done. So what I will say about the Chester County DA's office as a positive is that, like, unlike if we're going to take a positive out of this, any other office who has looked at this, they have not said, sorry, this is a determined suicide. So we are not, based upon the medical examiner's report, we're done with this. Case closed. That is not what they said. So that is, that does remind me of the place almost 17, 18 years ago that I interned at, because I do think those individuals have an amazing amount of integrity. Now, with that said, I still am unhappy with the language of beyond a reasonable doubt, but at least they have said, and it left open the door, and this is not a paying lip service. I think this is a really positive thing, that they left open the door that this is albeit inactive, we're not saying it's closed, which is positive. Now, how do you bring a case to answer the more specific question when it wasn't properly investigated? I will tell you right now, to everyone who's listening, as a prosecutor, I've had many cases that were not properly investigated. Now, I still needed evidence, and I still needed in my heart of hearts to truly believe, based upon that evidence, that I had a prima facie case, right? And so sometimes you don't have the best evidence. Sometimes I look at it and go, I definitely have a prima facie case, but this is going to be extremely challenging. And guess what? If I met my burden, you bring those charges and you allow the fact finder, which is the jury, or the judge, if you're doing a waiver, we don't need to get into nuances of that, but you allow the fact finder to tell you, Mr. or Miss Prosecutor, that you're wrong.
By the way, this is important, and I'm going to read it because people listen in the car. Chester County DA, the number is 610-344-6801. Again, 610-344-6801. Have their phones ringing all day tomorrow. Just keep it going. Just let those phones ring. Let them answer. Tell them you want this case investigated. You can tell them what Guy said, that it does not need to be beyond a reasonable doubt for this to be investigated. So, just please, everyone, stay on it, share it. I just saw a comment. Someone just said that they tell everyone about the story at Starbucks, in the supermarket. I was literally at T-ball for my son just now, which is why I pushed the show back an hour. Got some amazing hits. It was only practice though, but
Proud father.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But look, I was telling another father about this case, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to tune in tonight." So, I mean, something as simple as that catches people's attention and gets them curious. Now, I'm going to go back to the end of this statement, because the end of this is where Gavin Fish kind of talked me off the ledge a little bit. So it goes through this whole thing, and it says, this is the third line in the first paragraph. Miss Greenberg's death, because we cannot meet our burden of proof with the information and evidence presently available, we place this investigation in an inactive status. Now this is the part where Gavin thought this was positive. There is no statute of limitations for criminal homicide in Pennsylvania, and because investigations can take new directions, we are not closing the case. Guy DeAndrea, did you see the glass half full here? What Gavin Fish said is, in no legal document or press release anywhere ever over the 14 years has it been referred to as criminal homicide, or the words criminal homicide used until this press release. So is this progress?
I think it is progress, and I don't presume to know what their thought process was, but what I do know is that these press releases, especially when it's a release versus someone standing in front of a microphone and answering live, meaning sometimes they have slip of the tongues, right? This was carefully thought out in terms of the wording, and they have a press person. There's no doubt about it. And so what this at least suggests to me, right? This is what it suggests to me, that they are waiting for the courts to do the right thing so that the medical examiner's opinion can actually be reversed and the real ruling or finding can be had. Because what I will say to the Chester County District Attorney's Office, defense credit, I don't know how you want to say it, but as a prosecutor, it is almost impossible. So I get where they're coming from with this sentiment of we can't prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't deny that sentiment, meaning here's why. You can't go before a jury realistically with a medical examiner who's going to say this is suicide. I mean, you need someone to say from a medical expert perspective that it was a homicide. And if your own government official expert medical examiner isn't going to say that and actually is going to contradict you, it makes it, and excuse this language, but damn near impossible.
I was just taking some notes. By the way, Josh or Sandee, do we know if they found that there were two knives that were used? There are two knives. Okay, so
a serrated edge knife and a smooth edge knife.
And Sandee, I mean, knowing that,
women don't use knives and stab themselves to death anymore. They use drugs and painless ways of doing this. So right off the bat, there are no other cases like this around.
You just heard it from Josh's father, which is what I was trying to get to. Doesn't the manner of death have to be changed before they'll do anything? So, Guy, please explain to people this. There's a very tiny part of this entire case that's going before the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I want to say December 9th. I hope I have that date right. We're going to be doing a story on it. Explain what that's all about.
11th.
I'm sorry, what is it?
December 11th.
December 11th. Okay. December 11th. And by the way, Gavin's going to be there covering it. I don't think there's Are there cameras in the state Supreme Court? No, I don't think so. Okay.
Well, no. Hang on. The state Supreme Court, you can watch that live streamed.
You can. Okay.
Yes. Now, what I was going to say is there's not cameras allowed in Pennsylvania criminal court or civil court, right? You're not going to have a news crew in a homicide trial or a civil trial. Just not permitted.
But it will be streamed to the public, the Supreme Court hearing.
Yes. I forget exactly where you can watch it. But yes, you can watch it after the fact as well.
Well, we're gonna do it live. So, Guy, at
Sure.
some point, I'm gonna hit you up for that link. But Guy, explain, please, what is gonna happen on December 11th with the state Supreme Court?
Well, they're going to hear argument, right? I mean, so there won't be any decision rendered that day. Instead, they'll hear argument, and it can take 6 to 12 months to get a ruling. Not unfortunately, because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court takes a considerable amount of time, not because they're delaying the process, but because I really believe in our Pennsylvania Supreme Court. I really do. I don't always agree with them, but I believe in the process. And they spend a tremendous amount of time doing everything in their power to make sure they get it right. And they write very detailed opinions. And in this case, this is not easy for them. I'm not saying it's hard either. What I'm suggesting is this is not something where they can look and say, well, for the past 50 years, this really has been decided 12, 15, 20, 30 times. It hasn't been, right? So
Right.
this is them really going to be looking at this and analyzing the law, analyzing what's fair based upon that law. And whoever the judge who is, or the justice rather, who's going to be authoring this opinion one way or the other, I know, and I have full faith in our Supreme Court, is going to take a really, really hard look at this and then ultimately have to present it to the other justices so that they can vote. And there may be, it doesn't have to be unanimous. There can be a dissent. So it's a process with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, as it should be, because once they rule, that is the law.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and that is the media in New York. Philly, look, the Inquirer's done really well. This guy, John Lucy, has stayed on it at Penn, PA Live or Penn Live. Ned Smith here. Didn't her fiance marry someone else? Yes, he did. He's married with 2 kids, living in New York City, possibly a producer for a golf channel. So his life's, I'm sorry, say again?
Not anymore.
Oh, not anymore. So my point is he's living his quote unquote best life. The media needs to get a camera in his face and ask him what happened that night. And I'd be very curious to speak to his wife, because a leopard does not change its spots. So I'm curious to know what's going on there. Yes, the answer to this is yes.
Trying to make it to that?
No.
Josh from Teen Bean here. Do parents have a private investigator? You guys do. By the way, Josh and Sandee have spent, last time I heard the number was $500,000. Now Gavin is telling me it's close to $800,000 of their own money to try to get this case investigated. Tom Brennan is a retired Pennsylvania state trooper. He was going to join us tonight. Not sure exactly what happened, but we'll get him back on. And he's been on before. People wanted to know, Josh and Sandee, if you have some point of contact with law enforcement. Do you even have that? Something as small as that?
We've never had contact with them. Even from the day Ellen was murdered and was dead, they never told us what was going on. I'm gonna change the subject. I apologize.
No, not at all.
Well, there's a very interesting thing going to happen in April. A book's going to come out written by
Nancy Grace.
and her
And
co-author,
Renee
a co-author about this whole case. So everything will be in black and white. April 22nd. What happened to Ellen?
And we're going to get Nancy on she's been on the show before, our show before, and she will come on the show again. By the way, we're the same publisher, Post Hill Press. So that is going to help. And there's other stuff being done behind the scenes that has not come to the surface yet, but it will shortly. And hopefully that blows this wide open. Look, Josh Shapiro, in my opinion, should not be able to run for president. And some people speculate that's why he had a hard time being picked for VP, but this has to get out there. Guy, I'm going to send this back to you. So that I guess there was an independent autopsy. Some injuries were inflicted while postmortem is the term. Can you discuss that?
Sure. So that's exactly what I was saying earlier as it relates to if the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, any investigator can show me other reports that suggest otherwise, I would look at that, right? And I would analyze it with the same mindset that I analyzed this case from the beginning. So what we see in the actual autopsies, quite frankly, that were done post all of this sort of coming on my plate back when I was at the prosecutor's office, is that it's clear, unless someone shows evidence to the contrary, the injuries were inflicted post-mortem. So that means that someone stabbed Ellen after she was dead. So you have to, if you still believe this was a suicide, this is what you'd have to believe, is that she took her life and then someone came in and said, I suppose, and I don't mean to be flippant here, but I'm going to gratuitously stab a woman who has just taken her own life. I mean, I say it tongue in cheek because it's ludicrous, right? But if that's what you want to believe, that's what you would have to believe to still understand, or at least come to the conclusion that this is a suicide.
I really
go ahead,
Josh.
Please, Joel.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate, Joel, you giving me the floor so much. That was the conclusion of an employee of the medical examiner's office. And when she took that in 2015 to the head medical examiner, he told her not to write a report.
Mm-hmm.
So that was never in an autopsy. It was just blurted out and almost made my lawyer have a heart attack at a pre-trial questioning.
When she was deposed.
Deposition.
Several years later.
So
that's when it all came out.
That's on a videotape and an audio tape. But I want to emphasize, we did not hire that person.
She was being deposed.
Yeah. Again, she was being deposed. You just heard Josh and Sandee say that. For those who did not hear that correctly, 2 of the stab wounds were after she had died. So to Guy's point, it would have to be some cruel, sick human who would then decide to stab a dead person who had just stabbed themselves to death, if you are to believe that this was an unaliving. Try to make that make any sense. It doesn't. Great questions coming in, and we're going to go for a little bit longer because I want to try to flesh this out. But from Marie Claude Palacio, Guy, can you tell us a bit more about the specific elements you have to use to charge Sam, coupled with this one, Guy? They put everything in front of a grand jury. What about this?
Yeah. So great questions. So I will be very careful in saying that I have never said who I would or wouldn't charge in this case.
Very good. Very good, Guy.
Yeah. But here's what I will say. How do you charge someone? What could you do even based upon what you knew here? So what you do as a prosecutor, what I would have done, and it breaks my heart that I was not involved in this case from day one. And I mean that. What I would have done is, first, you start foreclosing possibilities, right? So, and I did this when I was reviewing the file. Who gained entrance into this apartment complex, right? And I would not have pulled the tape from just a couple of hours before the presumed death, right?
Now you're bringing up other things, Guy.
I would have pulled tape from the entire day, right? And by the entire day, I mean going all the way back, probably closer to 24 hours, right?
Right.
Who had ingress, egress? You start categorizing and flagging. Okay, this person came, this person went. Is this laborious? Is this tedious? No doubt. But that's what our job was. So you start identifying who could or could not have done this, right? Then you start looking at what's realistic, what's probable, what's probabilistic. And then you start analyzing it from that perspective. You also start looking at things and questioning things from day one, meaning, why are there bruises that appear to be of either a domestic violence situation? And if it was domestic violence, has anyone looked into this? Or if not domestic violence, certainly someone who would have access to Ellen on almost a daily basis, who's been investigated for that, right? There's so many things. And so you start to pare it down as to who are the likely suspects. And then once you pare it down, you then cross-reference that with who was inside the condo, the apartment complex that day, right? Or within the 24 hours, and you narrow it down. So if there's, what am I getting at? If you can prove that within, call it 4 hours of Ellen's death, that there were 30 people inside of an apartment complex or let's use this hypothetical, any place. Well, of those 30 people, do all of them have access, like personal access to Ellen on a daily basis that could have inflicted
personal secret access?
Right. And if the answer is no, that not all 30, okay, well, how many of these 30? So you see what I'm getting at? As you start to pare this down, you limit your suspect pool. And then once you do that, you can have maybe theories, maybe more than that, if this was properly investigated, someone to charge, right? I have had homicides. One of my more infamous ones was the Craigslist killer. And I'm not trying to promote myself. That's not the point in this. My point in sharing this is the Craigslist killer was a 2-week jury trial. This individual is now serving multiple life sentences. No one, not one person in that 2-week homicide walked into the room, pointed to the person I had charged with, murder and multiple counts of armed robbery, and said, that's the guy that did it. Not one person. There was 0 eyewitnesses who said that person pulled the trigger. So how did I prove that case? Circumstantial and other forms of direct evidence that you tie and build together, right? You don't always have an eyewitness. So you have to build a case, right? And you build that case step by step, methodically, on the backs of an amazing investigation, or really a more, said differently, I suppose, a proper investigation.
Joel, could we see the picture of the door?
Yeah.
The medical examiners.
100%. By the way, COE is going to put a link to the petition in the show summary. As you heard, 175,000 people. Someone else, and I've been thinking about this. You guys remember We Are the World? What if someone can help organize this? It would be amazing to get as many true crime content creators to either do one show at the same time or do shows on consecutive nights on different channels to really make a statement. If there's someone out there who can help organize that, it is survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com, survivingthesurvivor@gmail.com. Here's the door, Josh.
If you look at the swing lock, it's not the plates that attached it to the frame and the door are more or less intact. So how did anybody manage to enter that apartment when that swing lock was intact, when it swung over? Now, swing locks can also be played with, so to close it from the outside and open it from the outside. But that's the swing lock that was supposedly protecting the person inside that apartment. You see two screws that are slightly bent out of shape, but you don't see the lock coming off the door. So that means that swing lock bar is how far that door opened while the swing lock was still intact. Very skinny person got in that apartment. Meaning we don't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, but also
and that's a picture by the medical examiner's staff.
I don't want to get
what?
Well, I was going to say, almost said differently, but agreeing with the same point, is if you breach that door full force, or any force really, one of two things is going to happen. Either where you see the breach, where you see the screws loose, that entire piece almost needs to come off to get in, or the other side needs to come off, right? There has to be a break of one of those two locks to truly, in a forced entry, to gain proper entry into this apartment. And what you see is just not there. And this, by the way, just for anyone who's first time listening, these are not photographs or materials that were produced by Josh or Sandee. These are photographs produced by the first responders. In other words, this isn't some expert who was hired to say, this is what I believe it looked like. This is what it looked like when the first responders arrived.
Guys, something that a lot of people are asking, and I'm looking for that Hershey PA video simultaneously. What about the feds? I've heard a lot of people say, well, why don't we get the feds involved? How tough is that? What circumstances does that happen under?
They wouldn't have jurisdiction, and here they wouldn't have jurisdiction. So how do the feds get involved in homicides? They get involved in homicides when it involves a firearm. Why? They're not cherry picking. It's because firearms are largely, if we're going to get really nuanced into the law, but the long and short of it is firearms are produced in multiple different states. And the theory in which when a federal prosecutor decides to take on what would otherwise be a purely state law matter is they get to use or utilize the Interstate Commerce Act, meaning if someone commits a crime with something that has affected interstate commerce because a gun is built largely in multiple different states, or at least the parts were, they can utilize that if they choose. They don't often do that either, but they would have no jurisdiction in this case.
COE, I just texted it to you. You've got it now. So there you got it. That's why the feds are not involved. Another question, Guy, that is always asked is, how come Josh and Sandee have not filed a civil suit where you can then depose all these people?
Well, they have. Maybe I'm not understanding the question.
I mean, like looking for financial damage.
Oh,
I don't
like a
believe
wrongful
it.
death case, you're saying?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's played, but it's the most famous case, which is the O.J. Simpson case, right? And not guilty at a trial, and then ultimately a civil case for wrongful death. But that still falls back on the reason that in those cases it was successful is because, for instance, Nicole Brown Simpson was deemed to have been murdered. Right? A homicide, right? Here, how would they bring a wrongful death? First of all, they were led to believe for years that this is what the investigation showed, and it was only until they have people look into this independently, and sadly having to spend so much of their own resources to have a proper investigation done, did they realize what was really going on. But even beyond that, right now, I'm a civil attorney. If someone came to me, no matter how heartbreaking the story would be, I don't know how with a straight face I could bring a wrongful death case when it was ruled a suicide.
But Guy, the deposition that the medical examiner said the wounds were post-mortem, that changes everything.
No doubt.
That changed, and the fact that the head of the ME office said, "Do not write a report."
Yeah,
that changes everything.
It's a game changer.
We may have suspected up till then that there was something going on here that was, let's say, fishy, but we know it now that they were in cahoots to block the truth about Ellen.
That's a game changer.
I'm sorry?
That fact is a game changer. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. They were in cahoots. That's another word for cover up. Ida Shaw, JD, she asked me this last night. And I promised I would ask Josh and Sandee and or Guy, whoever can answer it. But she had commented that the cleaning of the crime scene, I guess, was requested, Josh or Sandee, by you in accordance with Jewish religion. Not correct.
No,
absolutely not.
So Guy, let's go to you on that. So
I can't comment on that.
We can't comment.
I was born.
My dear Andrea can't comment.
All right. Well, Josh,
Catholic. No, I'm kidding. I don't know what your question
no.
is.
Oh, I thought you were being serious there. No. What's the deal with this? What's the deal with this crime scene cleanup? How soon were they there? Also, the judge, who is Sam Goldberg's uncle, and the cousin walk out with laptops and other digital forensic,
but not the engagement ring.
But not the engagement ring. Interesting.
Only electronic and personal items.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that I would have, if I were involved from day one. It's whether you don't know for sure one way or the other, despite what you're actually seeing, right? And I'm saying that sort of, I don't know, flippantly, but you do not allow someone to walk out with electronic devices, period, end of story, when you have this type of scene. And then with that said, you still don't know what the medical examiner is going to say. In other words, let me take a step back on this, right? The person who determines whether something is at least as the language that's used currently on the medical examiner's forms, whether it's a homicide, suicide, or undetermined, is the medical examiner's office. Why am I stressing this? Because the police department at this point doesn't know. They might have strong beliefs, opinions. Who cares? And I'm saying that maybe a little strongly, but it's not for them to say. Meaning the medical examiner is going to say whether or not this is a homicide or a suicide. Now, of course, there's exceptions and all of that, but I don't think they apply here. In any event, if they don't know, if they do not know what the medical examiner is going to say when you have a scene like this, at least until you hear otherwise, this must be maintained as a homicide, right? In an abundance of caution, meaning no one's taking any devices off the property, right? No civilian is even entering the property, let alone being allowed to have a cleaning crew that is hired to clean crime scenes. It makes zero sense, right? Meaning preserve the scene until you understand otherwise. And then, of course, if at the end of the day, here's the proof, that this is in fact not a homicide, then of course devices are released, personables or items are released, the scene is cleaned. There's no doubt about it. But to release or allow there to be released personal digital devices, as well as a professional cleaning crew to come in, and I don't mean professional as in a house cleaner. I mean professional in the sense
crime
of
scene.
a crime scene unit, right?
Crime scene cleanup.
Crime Scene Cleanup was the name of
The actual name of the company was Crime Scene.
Now
Cleanup.
here's a little excitement.
Yeah.
They normally take pictures of the crime scene before they clean up. They don't have any. The manager who was babysitting our daughter's corpse took videos. The police took the video. Oh, and they can't find it.
Yeah, I'd never seen that.
No, they can't find it. And you were right about the tape. We have a 4-hour piece of tape, which we should have 24 hours of.
No doubt.
You're talking about the surveillance footage?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a good chunk of that missing. Could Joel ask Dan Abrams to cover this case? I used to produce for Dan Abrams, obviously a very bright legal mind with a powerful platform. Listen, everyone I talk to, I'm one of these guys. I could care less about competing on a story. I just want this to get some resolution. I've told, Ashley Banfield's people about this. I've told
they've done some work on it.
Yeah, they have. Brian Enton's doing some great work on this. He's a friend of ours.
We've met them.
Yeah, but I mean, anyone and I was on Fox 29 to promote my book, and I told them while I was pitching my book, to cover this case, which they've done. So it's listen, when you're a reporter, you got to be pesky and a bit of a pain in the you-know-what. That's why, Carm taught me to be that way. Chris Cuomo is I'm friendly with him. I'm not dropping names here, but we're in an email relationship. I haven't thought to contact Chris. I will. They're heavily mired in politics right now, so that's what they're concerned with right now. Josh or Sandee, is there anything that the public doesn't know that we should know that's kind of overlooked a lot? Something that a couple things you want to share? One thing that
I'll share one thing. Yeah. The first autopsy has fraud. It has a note by a world-renowned forensic pathologist, neuroforensic, by the name of Rourke.
Lucy Rourke Adams.
Lucy Rourke, if she looks at a patient, a body, for lack of a better term, issues a report, issues a bill. She never issued a bill, and she never issued a report. When Tom spoke to her, she just hung up on him. She wouldn't speak to him. But there was a note in the autopsy that she did. And when they try and discuss it, they can't, because they didn't talk to her.
It's a fraudulent paragraph.
Right. And then at his deposition, Osborne says he took there's a piece of tissue that for some strange reason they kept, which is not helping them at all. It's a piece of spinal tissue. And he took it across to her because she's an older woman in the snowstorm. She totally disavows that.
By the way,
no one knows. So there's fraud.
There's no paperwork that occurred that day.
Also, the meeting you keep mentioning.
Yeah, tell us about that.
There's no record of that meeting. There were no notes taken. Nobody signed anything. Nothing's there. I'm not going to ask Josh this, but Guy, that meeting, as far as we know, and I know Guy's time and Josh and Sandee is very valuable, but we're going to wrap in a moment, I promise. But Guy, what was that meeting all about? When did it take place?
There's no note of that meeting. The notes of meetings.
Real quick, I'm sorry. The medical examiner's name is Dr. Marlon Osborne, and he's still working. He did the
he works in Florida, near where we live.
He did the Parkland shooting. So anyway, Guy, go ahead.
The meeting.
Right. There's no note of that meeting. There are notes of meetings, but those meetings largely, which actually this is before I could tell you what Josh and Sandee looked like, sounded like, never even spoke to them. I read notes where, and I don't say this often, but to Larry Krasner's credit, was peppering the DA's office with, show us the file, show us the file, show us the file. And ultimately, what I've read, at least in the notes, is this is, again, before I've ever spoken with Josh or Sandee, they sit these parents down and say, "Here's a criminal file. Look at it." And it
They
struck
wouldn't let
me
us
as
have
so
any. We had
unfair.
a.
Wouldn't
They
have
brought
it.
out, go ahead. I'm sorry. They brought out
No,
all
I
the
was
evidence.
saying,
They
sorry,
wouldn't
go
let
ahead.
us bring anybody to look at it with us.
Right. So they wouldn't even let the lawyer in the room. So you
Right.
have two. No disrespect to you two.
No,
you have two,
I agree.
Yeah, you have two civilians who are in the midst of immense grief, have never investigated a homicide, let alone any crime, and are told, "Here's the file. You have a couple hours to look at it to make heads or tails of why
And you
we
cannot
did
copying
it."
anything.
Can't copy anything. Can't take pictures of anything. And I'm reading this, going, "This is a joke. I mean, this is an absolute joke."
Yeah, Guy, this is interesting. I mean, was any DNA ever collected? DNA evidence?
No.
I thought they did during
No.
the. Yeah.
Well, they didn't act. Well, let me take a step back. There was a lot of areas that they could have examined, meaning there was marks or indications. I can't call it blood because I don't know. There was red marks or maroonish colored marks on the sheets in the bed. Now, that could be from a whole host of things. We don't know. There were other areas in the house that could have been examined and swabbed for DNA. There wasn't. There was swabs taken, so I don't want to misspeak, of the knife and the handle of the knife and other areas significant.
Not the knife in her chest.
Not the knife in her chest, but there were some swabs, but none of that was of any moment to me because largely it was Ellen who was injured. So when you swab the blood, the person it's going to come back to is Ellen, right?
Should be.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And I've had people who are expert at analyzing 911 calls. They say that fiancés, they're saying that he's not being truthful. We played that on the show before. And Guy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he contacted his cousin before 911. Yeah,
correct.
Calls his cousin
and his uncle.
Yeah, and then he happens, Guy, to not see a knife that's 4 or 5 inches deep in the chest. Is that right?
Well,
right.
That's right. And so what I've explained to people in the past about the 911 phone call, regardless of what you believe, and all I do is represent survivors of sexual violence and physical violence. So I understand how trauma can make people react differently. Now, what I'll say, though, with that caveat is the 911 phone call, there are one of two things happening. And there's really only two explanations for this. He is either not in the room with Ellen when he's describing what's happening because what he is describing is not at all what the scene looks like.
Right.
Or he's there and despite visibly seeing what's taking place in front of him, just not saying it, not even saying it remotely accurately. And so it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Law Junkie, did Sam attend Ellen's funeral, Sandee? They want to know.
Yes.
And Josh, did they interview? By the way, when he attended the funeral, what was his disposition like? I'm sure you were grieving so much you probably didn't even notice. But did he look visibly upset to you?
Yeah, it was somewhat. He had reason to be upset, we think.
He sure did, man. I'm sure he was.
In fact, I upset him. I upset the whole family, including my wife.
Tell us how, if you can.
Well, it was very simple. Guy will back me up. Who are the police going to investigate and talk to first? People who were close to Ellen, people who had access to Ellen. Sam has access to Ellen. Sam was the closest one to Ellen. So now he's crying and hugging his mother, and everyone tells me, including my wife, that I'm a jerk. And all I was doing was preparing him for what I knew was coming. The police were going to start with him, which they didn't do.
Listen, that's SOP. You eliminate, even I know that. You eliminate the person closest. You got to start eliminating possible suspects. Sandee, everyone keeps asking, what is Ellen's favorite color, favorite flower?
No, I don't know.
Do you know that?
You know that, Sandee? Pick something. Anything.
Anyone?
I think she liked peonies in terms of a flower. And in terms of her favorite color, I would say pink and blue.
Guy, was I wrong when I said to him that the police were going to discuss you?
No, it would be
a logical thing.
Point, you should. I mean, you have to just say, wait a second. There's 20 stab wounds, right?
You start with who was not an outside in the street type crime.
It's always
who had access.
It's not profiling, right? I guess it's profiling in a positive way, but you always start with the significant other when there's what appears to be in the domestic household with a breaking and entering, right? You always start with the most obvious, and you can either quickly rule it out or not, right?
Right.
But of course, you have to question that person.
So I was trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
And let him know this was going to happen so he could brace himself. But he
Yeah.
reacted like a child crying.
But the night of the funeral and days after, we didn't really know what happened to Ellen.
Right. We
had no idea that she had all those stab wounds and that her body was brutalized.
We didn't know any of that.
It was only when I got strong enough and Josh got strong enough and we made up our minds that, we wanted to learn more about what happened, and we got facts. And
I made a deal with Ellen. Something was wrong. I couldn't treat it. I didn't know what to do. What? And I made a deal that if she went to a psychiatrist of our choosing, because I think she had a psychological problem, but I didn't know what it was, and I can't say anything, because I was worried about her job and her health. That's all I knew.
We talked about this.
A job and her health. And that's when the diagnosis of anxiety came out. That's when the whole thing with not suicidal came out by the psychiatrist, not a psychologist, a psychiatrist. That's where we learned more. And that's when things started tumbling.
Keith Morrison be a great person for this. He's the biggest of the big. By the way, keep his pillow. My kid just came in here. That's Keith Morrison. My kid walked in and goes, "Why is Donald Trump in your office?" Said that's not Donald Trump. That's Keith Morrison at Dateline. One other really disturbing fact too. There's so many. And Guy, we'll get your final thoughts. She was propped up against like the cabinets. But the blood was running horizontally.
Oh.
It defies physics. So, Guy, just explain that, and then just whatever, however you want to put a bow on this tonight. We're going to obviously have you back soon. Here's the GoFundMe campaign, Justice for Ellen, but the blood on the face, Guy, and however you want to take it out.
Sure. So when Ellen was found in a seated position up against the kitchen cabinetry, again, assuming everyone was telling the truth, let's take everyone for the benefit of the doubt, right? For these purposes. So you have the fiance, Sam, saying, "I did not move the body." That's unequivocally clear. I did not move the body. The first responders say the body was not moved. What is that? What's the significance of that? Meaning, if they enter and she has a straight line of blood running without any drip or drag marks, for that to have happened, she would have had to have been at some point in time either on her side or on her back long enough for the blood to run that way, pull that way, and ultimately dry that way, meaning she would have passed away prior to ever been able to put herself in a seated position up against the cabinet, which means someone moved her. So who moved her? Why? Prior to the first responders getting there? It's just another open question. And, as my last remarks, I've been asked before, because I've done probably a dozen or so media outlets. Why do I keep doing this? How long have you known the Greenbergs? And I said, honestly, I know them from doing this. I don't know them in the sense that people are shocked to hear this. I've never met them in person, right? Never met Josh or Sandee in person. So I do this, one, because I care about this in what they went through. And I care about it because of who I've learned them to be and sitting with them in settings like this. And because justice is all that I think they have ever asked for. And what that means is, at least from my perspective, what is the truth, right? What is the truth? What should have been done? What, if it were done, would the outcome have been? And where could this have been to give never closure, because they're not getting Ellen back, but it's a big difference from not getting Ellen back to having to be told, or at least attempted to be forced to believe, that their daughter stabbed herself 20 times, right? That's
we
not
don't believe it.
I know you don't believe that now, but the justice is, why wasn't this investigated properly? And if so, or if it were, what's the truth, right? That's justice, finding out the truth. And that's the mission they've been on. And it's a mission that I am happy to the extent they want me, or you all want me to participate in, because the truth needs to be told and found in this case. Period. Full stop. End of story.
Thank you.
By the way, this brought up the fact I do know Keith's longtime producer, and I'm going to reach out to him. We met at CrimeCon. Good guy. Jenny Allison, Guy, one more thing here. Did any police or law enforcement ever extensively interview Sam? Did he come to you to try to talk to explain, or did you two have the chance to talk to him? I mean, obviously, this is for
No.
Josh shaking his head. No, he's never been interviewed, right?
No, that's not true.
He has.
He has
been interviewed.
He was
Okay.
interviewed by a homicide detective. So the next question is, well, what did he say? Well, he didn't say much because he was interviewed by a homicide detective, and in the presence of, or rather, going into that interview, because it wasn't an interrogation, it was an interview, he had with him what I truly believe is the best criminal defense attorney in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, ask Cuomo.
I mean, was he invoking his Fifth Amendment right, or was he?
No, but if you have an attorney there, it's a very different interview than if you don't.
He had two attorneys.
Yeah,
D. Simone.
Yeah.
By the way,
Yeah,
I have a funny feeling that Sam might be watching this. Sam, I mean this honestly. Come on this platform and tell us your side of the story. No one's heard it. James Schwartzman, Kamian Schwartzman, come on this. I know James Schwartzman has threatened other content creators. Instead of doing that, come on this platform and tell us your side of the story. What happened that night? Why are you guys so quiet? Why aren't you talking to anybody? It's weird. Aren't you sad that this guy's fiance died? It's weird. It's doesn't make any sense. Sandee and Josh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sandee and Josh. Josh first. Your final thoughts. Whatever you want to leave us with. We're going to leave on a happy note tonight. But go ahead, Josh.
We have gotten farther than anybody has ever in this type of case. Meaning, the medical examiner and what's the thing standing. That's what the Supreme Court is. And to me, these are two possibly archaic laws that Sandee and I don't have standing. I don't know how far this law of standing goes back. Is it a law or precedent? I don't even know. But that's what's going to happen when we talk to the Supreme Court, that we should have standing to get justice for our daughter. In fact, the judges in the lower court who set this up, so to speak, by writing that 30-page document, they think we should get justice.
So, and what I want to say on a different light is how grateful Josh and I are to the community at large and all the good people, the supportive people, the caring people.
The media people like Joel.
And Guy.
Yes.
Doing things because they think it's the right thing to do. So we have a lot to be grateful for, and we are going to continue to fight. This is not going away. This is a big political sham.
And we're not going away.
Yeah. There was a comment that said Ellen would be so proud of her parents, which I have to believe is the truth. Listen, the only right here, Anne-Marie says this all. We've got work to do for these nice people and for Ellen. This is going to go nowhere with me, but if you take this show and you share it and you go to Gavin Fish and you share his stuff and you get other content creators, there is power in numbers. So please get together, do what you do, tell your neighbor, tell your friends, get people upset because this is upsetting, and have them act on it. Very quickly tomorrow, Courtney Clenny is in court. She's the so-called OnlyFans model accused of stabbing her boyfriend in a fit of rage. She's in court. We're going to cover that. And then Phil is here tomorrow. Scott has something to do. So we're going to have Phil and Rob D'Amico of the FBI discussing what comes out of that. They just did a test in court for this case, which we're going to tell you about tomorrow morning. Last but not least, this is our trip to Hershey, Pennsylvania. This is where the wedding was. My daughter, who's now 10, was 2 or 3 at the time. Here we go. Very quick.
It's just chocolate, Vita.
One more time. She didn't like Mr. Hershey bar.
No, yeah.
It's just chocolate, Vita.
Never saw a primal scream like that.
Joel, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Thank you,
Guy.
Ellen.
you.
Thank you,
Guy. Thank you all.
Sandee,
Love you,
thank you.
America. Justice for Ellen Greenberg. Love you, Atlanta. Love you, Florida, and Philly. Get your you know what together. Good night.
Be well, everybody. Be well.